like to dive a little deeper here. Always ask the question, what brought you to this profession? What brought you to natural medicine, integrative medicine, naturopathic profession specifically,
Yeah,
with all that comes with that? What brought you here?
yeah, really good question. I have kind of a long, twisty road that it was one of those roads that while I was on it, didn't necessarily look like it was all going to knit together. And then I found natural medicine, and it was like all of my interests aligned in sort of one space and sphere. So I've always been very interested in medicine. And sciences. So the natural sciences, biology, and then just sort of human physiology has always been really interesting to me. So I have, I remember a funny story from when we were in elementary school. We had to do this year-long project, and we all got to pick what we wanted to. We had to pick what we wanted to do, and it was like just kind of trying to practice putting in a year's long worth of effort into any one thing, and this idea of sort of becoming at a fifth grade level more of an expertise and you're an expert in whatever field. And my classmates I remember picked like golf or like surfing, or one of my girlfriends picked Elvis to study for the whole year, and I picked cancer. Like I just, yeah, right, what a fun 10-year-old, right? Yeah. So, and I remember presenting on and even at the time being like, well, what I'd found was maybe some like little Newsweek article that was saying like, oh, we're seeing success when we incorporate a couple of therapies together. If we do radiation and chemo, we're seeing, wow. And so I've just always kind of been interested. So in my college career, I studied biology. I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which was an amazing experience because there was so research heavy and there was so much sort of free reins for curious minds. So I was able to spend a lot of time with my professors one-on-one, and I was even able to kind of design some of my own little like extracurricular courses and research projects. And I loved that. I graduated with my BA in biology and not much of a plan, but I was in Portland, Oregon, and Oregon Health Science University was right up the hill there. And so I got a job as a lab tech, and I was a terrible lab tech. I was real bad. It took me about a year and a half in that lab full time to actually figure out what we were studying. It was so complicated. It was this DNA repair model through the model of Fanconi's anemia, and it was the DNA repair interaction, right? Which today is stuff I use all the time. So it's kind of, that's part of that, how I have managed to sort of come around and use knowledge, from being back in the lab 20 years ago. So I spent about 8 years in research lab, and I loved it. And research is a blast, but it is also a slow, boring blast. It's kind of like you're alone a lot, right? Which I'm a little more on the social end of things. At least I like social interactions and kind of a structured space. And then I like a lot of alone time, but just a ton of alone time was kind of a lot for me in the lab. And also I always had this feeling that I wanted to be able to kind of participate in people's well-being. And on the lab side of things, you're like, well, ultimately, what we're doing on the bench might wind up in a clinical research trial. This might turn into a drug that helps someone. This might ultimately help someone down the road, but you don't see it.
Yeah, it was
So
removed.
yeah, and also the other thing was I knew that I didn't want to necessarily become a PI in a laboratory, because they don't get to do the bench work anymore. And that's what was interesting to me, is actually asking the questions, designing the projects, and doing the projects with my hands on the bench. So the folks at the top end, all they're doing is writing research grants and kind of scrambling to keep their lab funded and publish. And so I knew I didn't want to go that route. But then I also saw the careers of folks that were doing lab research on the bench for a long time. Maybe they had masters or they were lab managers, and folks kind of past their mid-40s were not happy with what they were doing anymore, right? And I was like, okay, there doesn't appear to be longevity here, right? I had always been interested in medicine, like I said, and I kind of hit this point where I'd left Oregon. I moved down to UC Davis, and I was managing a lab in the vet school there, and that was so fun and so interesting. And also, but I sort of started hitting that, like, getting restless. It's time for me to go back to school. And I started applying to conventional medical schools. I took my MCATs, I did the whole thing, and I was in the application process. I'm writing the essays, I'm doing it. And I sort of had this moment, I mean, I call it my moment of epiphany, but it was this moment of realization where I was like, I don't really know that I can make a career out of telling people to do something with their health that I'm unwilling to do with my own. Specifically, I don't want to sling pills. I think there's more to wellness than a prescription pad. And what I saw at that time, was that most of doctor-patient interactions involved a piece of paper and a prescription, and there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on lifestyle or nutrition or the things that actually make up the bulk of our wellness. So I stepped back and I didn't put any applications in, and I had peripherally was familiar with naturopathic medicine just from living in Portland, Oregon, because I would ride that number 8 bus over the river, right past the National College of Natural Medicine, and then up the hill to OHSU. And so I knew that there was this college there. I just kind of vaguely knew that it was medically related. I didn't know anything else about it. And I started looking into it. And once I had sort of a feeling that there was more to it than, this idea of kind of like maybe crystals and chanting, right? Once I was like, oh, there is medicine happening here in every definition of the word. I only applied to that one school because I was familiar with Portland. And so I was like, National College of Natural Medicine, put in one application, got in, and it was a late application. I think you were same story. I had a little more heads up than you, but I knew at least like a couple months before I was starting. I think you knew like maybe the weekend before. I'm teasing you, but
Yeah, quite last minute though.
yeah. So kind of similar story. And I'd never been to see a naturopathic doctor. How about that? Right.
Yeah,
I jumped full in, and the amount of student loans we sign off on to jump into this career, having never actually seen a naturopath.
a little crazy.
Bold.
Old.
And it's funny is the bulk of my classmates had never seen a naturopathic doctor either, right? So our first probably couple of years in school, I think, was really kind of spending a lot of time relearning this idea that there is medicine outside of what is held in the conventional world that works, right? And it works beautifully, and it has minimal side effects, and we bring patients to a greater state of health.